Dune Spice Wars today receives its 5th playable faction, House Corrino, entering the fold as part of the second major update, slightly later than expected, in Dune Spice Wars' early access period. In this video, I'll take you through not only the new house, but also its spicy new units that you can see on screen, as well as the broader changes that have come to Dune Spice Wars, because we didn't just receive a new house, there's actually a whole load of other things, including a brand new victory condition, a rebalancing of some existing ones, as well as new buildings. You name it, they've got it. And in this video, I'll cover it all, as well as showing you some up-to-date, brand new gameplay. Without any further ado, let's begin, and we'll start with House Corrino, the 5th playable faction to Dune Spice Wars. Welcome to the fold, our great Emperor. Here you can see the 5 factions on screen, from Atreides to Corrino. Let's jump in and have a closer look at what the Emperor brings to Dune Spice Wars. I'll keep some visuals up on screen throughout, by the way, so that you can follow along in case you've missed anything. House Corrino, as their faction bonus, gains hegemony by paying guild fees. A little bit more on them later. They can also use an Imperial action, the Imperial Mandate diplomatic action, which gets a tribute in replace of some influence. You also have +1 free building slot on your villages by default. As you move through, you'll pick up some other benefits as well that coincide nicely with your 4 councillors, extra airfield range, and you can use your main base deployment on neutral villages. Your councillors are all pretty varied and fairly different. The first 2 are rated hard. The second 2 here that you're looking at on screen at the minute are the easier ones. I've played around with them all a little bit, and I can say it seems to me that these councillors are more advanced than some of the others in the game, particularly from the earlier factions. If we take a slightly longer deep dive into them, we can see really interesting mechanics. Take a look at the first one, which can build some economic buildings twice over, but your gold upkeep is increased on buildings by 20%. The captain in second place reduces your infantry unit costs by nearly 1/3, but also reduces their combat stats. It's worth noting in this game, I am playing with that captain. They also, though, grant you 1 additional training slot, so you can go in with volume rather than power. The others are slightly more straightforward to play. House Corrino, therefore, fills an interesting niche in the meta, and of course we'll have to wait and see just how it develops. Take a look at their units here for a quick sneak peek. Considering the faction bonuses, it seems clear to me that once you especially get through to that 10,000 hegemony point, you are much more mobile, and the villages that you hold are likely to be more powerful than most, thanks to their extra building slot and that kind of thing. However, the additional authority cost, particularly as villages become further away from your main center, as well as some potential crazy sort of balancing, nerfing, i.e. taking double money but paying double upkeep, these sorts of trade-offs will make House Corrino a more interesting playstyle, a slightly more advanced one, but also at the same time maybe a slightly more generalized one. We'll have to see how it plays out. Let's move through and talk about their units, because they are spice-tastic. Here they are, your 5 chosen warriors, infantry and ranged, incinerators, your famous tax collectors, and then an artillery drone. Here we have a couple of new and unique unit types available. Artillery drone is one of the first vehicles that we've seen in the game. And, of course, we have those incinerators. Here, let me flash forward a little bit in the gameplay so that you can have a look at the different types of units at play. Here I have almost all of them on offer, including those really interesting artillery drones. The combat strategy here, as a reminder, I'm playing with the councillor that has nerfed my units but allowed me to train more of them, just to let you know, so that you can factor that in as you're watching this perhaps unsuccessful battle play out, but I think you'll get a feel for how the different units interact. Let's now take a slightly deeper dive and see their different stats, because, and in particular, I'm looking at those flamethrower units, there are some things that you really need to know. For starters, though, the infantry gains +1 power for each allied infantry and ranged infantry nearby, a maximum of 5. The same is applied to the ranged infantry. Nice, basic units, they combine really well together. Simple, straightforward DPS. Then you have the incinerator, those flamethrower units. These, in my experience, are much weaker, okay? They really are. They have less than half the health, I think, from memory. Their upside is that they can burn straight through armor. Armor doesn't matter. This may be more useful as you move through into the later parts of the game. It tends to be some of the later units to unlock that actually have armor. Something to bear in mind, particularly when you jump in, maybe like me, thinking, wow, all this fire, and then you're left a little bit disappointed. The Sardaukar execute enemies under 20% health and gain +5% executing health threshold upon killing an enemy for the rest of combat. That can be achieved at a ×5, so there can be up to 25% bonus. And then last but not least, we have these artillery drones, these giant big tank-looking things. They must be deployed before they can attack. They cannot fire within close range. You will have seen mine get tripped up a bit there. They must reload between shots, of course, but their ranged attacks deal a massive area of effect damage, and they have a 60% chance to destroy armor. So you can deal damage through armor with your flamethrowers, or you can have a 60% chance, so better than average, of just completely obliterating it with your artillery strikes. However, it's important to know that unlike a lot of units in Dune Spice Wars where you may be able to just send them in and forget about them-ish, depending on how many you have and who you're fighting, these artillery units will require a little bit more management with their setup, deployment, attacking, reloading, etc. Something to bear in mind. Corrino, of course, also has its own unique set of buildings, features, traits. Let's take a look at a few of the highlights. First and foremost, you'll need to be familiar with guild fees. These are collected spice paid by imperial taxes. Atreides, Harkonnen, here's looking at you. It must be paid to the Spacing Guild with the help of the spice collected, so this is kind of your own check and balance, your own taxation, taking spice, as you can see here in the spice report, from others, and then paying it forward, basically. The other thing, of course, to bear in mind is that we have some unique buildings and monuments here. Most importantly, House Corrino does not have access to those maintenance centers, those Solari savers. Instead, we have a propaganda office, which provides a whopping plus 30% resource production in the village, but it has an authority upkeep, and this can be quite throttling in the early game. So there's sort of an incentive to maybe build these a little bit later down the line, or focus on having just a couple of villages and build them up really well. As you move through later into the game, of course, authority becomes less important, and there you can start to really lean on that building. It's very exciting, and there are some really fascinating combinations, not just with the way that the building interacts with your councillors, but also, of course, with developments. Here we have a series of new developments. This is just a fraction of them, just a quick look. I won't go through each and every single one because honestly I feel like that would be a little bit painstaking. But as always, I'll have the sources linked in the description if you'd like to jump in and take a look. Most of the changes to the developments, or the tech tree if you want to call it that, are again focused around resource production, around buildings, around saving money and making money. That is really what we do best here as the Emperor, of course. And one last thing, because we're the Emperor, we also have that monument that you may have seen on screen earlier before. And not only can we get this alone, but of course we can get multipliers to stack on top of this thing, including doubling it and all sorts of crazy stuff, I'm sure. The Emperor monument, built on our main base, applies the district bonus again. Again, potentially. Allied villages in neighboring regions have +1 instance of the village's traits. So if you get near some villages that have particularly useful traits, my goodness, you are in luck. Moreover, you'll receive +500 hegemony per allied village in neighboring regions as well. So there's an incredible incentive to reach out and at least grab your neighboring villages and then build them up large with extra building slots, increased instances of their resources, you name it. There's a real ability to build up tall here for perhaps the first time in Dune Spice Wars. We're almost incentivized to do it much more than anything else. Now, with this mad lad successfully introduced, instead of clickbaiting you through into another video, I'm going to instead try something different, and we're just going to roll it out all in this one. I'm kidding. But seriously, we're going to move through now and talk about some of the broader changes to Dune Spice Wars outside of House Corrino. The first one is a rework to diplomacy, which of course fits the house nicely. Now there are fixed relation levels, a binary choice between truce and conflict. Truce costs authority to establish, and the longer you spend in a state of conflict, the less authority it'll take you to come back to that truce state. Aggression is completely forbidden while you're at truce. It's kind of like, I guess, a non-aggression pact, if you will. There are heavy penalties that you'll face as punishment around influence, soft power, that kind of thing, if you try and break it. It is, however, possible to enter conflict without penalty for a cost of influence. So again, you're leveraging soft power against or alongside hard power, I guess. The treaties themselves have also been reworked, as you can see on screen here as I attempt to try and trade with the treaties. Treaties are now only possible in truce, so you have to be in that non-aggression peaceful state to engage in treaties. They cost influence to set and cancel. They last until they're cancelled, so you don't have to keep redoing them over and over and over again, which is fantastic quality of life change at the very least. And also some new treaties have been added. And we'll move through now and talk a little bit about some of the new diplomatic, treaty, spying, espionage features changed or added in this update. House Corrino, of course, can leverage influence for a one-time power gain against their foes and leverage that in trade deals. One example of a new treaty engaged. We also have new resolutions at the Landsraad Council. CHOAM contracts all faction gain 50 shares. More on those and the new victory condition in a minute. We also have witnesses, which spawns 3 Landsraad judges for all factions. This is very powerful. Military investigations give a minus 50% military development completion speed. This is a very important one to bring military investigations up to speed with the rest. And last but not least, the War of Assassins. The elected faction gains not 1, but 2 assassins. All of these are very powerful. The First Council now also starts at the voting phase for easier onboarding, and Imperial Edicts have a small chance to happen randomly during the review phase if the Corrino faction isn't currently in the game. That's the changes to the Landsraad Council. Now let's move through and talk about a wider rework to Hegemony, another victory condition, and then we'll talk about that sweet, sweet economic one and more. Firstly, let's have a look at the Hegemony one, which was reworked according to the developers in line with trying to balance it better for multiplayer. Hegemony, if you don't know, is kind of like the score victory condition. Here's an example on screen, and you can see all of the different things that are feeding into it, from charters to special regions, the number of regions you control, your allies, and you'll notice a few things have changed or been removed from this list. In fact, 4 things have been added and 2 things have been removed. To slightly adjust how Hegemony works, it's also shifted from 30k down to 25k for the victory threshold, increased gains from regions, special regions that you control, allied sieges, held charters, and your overall standing with the council. You will no more gain from Hegemony for defeating enemy units or for paying taxes and bribes, unless you're playing as the new House Corrino, of course. As we've already discussed, that works a little bit differently. Overall, Hegemony, slightly easier to achieve. The threshold has been lowered. You get more Hegemony from the map in general and from diplomatic actions like charters and Landsraad Council standing, and less from defeating units and from paying those taxes. The taxes in particular were one that felt a little bit kind of easy and odd, so nice to see that change. Speaking of change, here's your brand new victory condition in Dune Spice Wars. The CHOAM market. Now, it was already slightly in the game in that there was an operation that you could do to get standing to win the game by buying these shares. Now it's a real living and breathing market, and I can show you not just from the patch notes, but of course in this carefully curated gameplay as well. Here you can see the market playing out in real time. You can buy and sell shares. So not only can you work towards a victory condition by holding at least 51% of the shares and being the overall chief shareholder, but you can also sell them to leverage them back for money and kind of play that victory condition against your bank account and your other development. Very fun, very exciting, and nice to see a way to actually win directly with money rather than having to leverage other abilities. Speaking of other abilities, really, this enables a whole load of abilities across the different factions and houses in Dune Spice Wars. The fundamental mechanics that you need to remember are that you can buy and sell these shares of CHOAM at the CHOAM market at basically any time by clicking up in the top left, and the victory condition is that you need to own more than 50% to win. That's it. Now, you won't just be able to rush this out and do it very easily in the early game, okay? You won't just be able to run out with your flamethrower and burn it down. No siree, Bob. Instead, you'll look to build it up over time. I think there are some really interesting interactions with trade as well. Don't forget that trade and diplomacy and treaties are another system that have been reworked in Dune Spice Wars. We've already discussed those changes earlier on, but I think it's important to remember that what Shadow Games are doing here is adding a whole load of different layers at the same time, and they all seem to be interlacing and interacting really well with one another. While some additional bonuses have been granted to the map, like those ones we discussed earlier around Hegemony, there are very few actual changes, except I want to highlight the village rework a little bit. Again, we see it interacting not just with everything else that's changed, but also the new playable faction. Villages have gone up from 1 to 2 traits now in the village rework, and there are 4 new traits, abilities that the villagers can provide you. Well diggers for +5 water, nice in the early game, fuel that expansion. Secret holders for +20% data center production, and you can build an additional one. Again, you can think about layering effects here. Youthful Eagerness gives a +20% recruitment office production, and 1 extra office can be built. The extra office is quite useful. And then finally, Former Soldiers gives you 1 extra militia slot, maybe enabling you to compete with House Harkonnen in certain villages. Hopefully you can line that up with your villages that are really key for your spice production as well. There are a whole load of other changes that have been brought to Dune Spice Wars. Here are but a few, and what I like to call the rest. That's right, there are a whole host of other changes, too many for me to go over in great detail, and a lot of them are relatively minor, but I'm putting them all up on screen now. It includes things like new hotkeys. These are really valuable. G key, the I key. New audio alert sounds have graced the game, as well as a few changes to the UI. Crucially, more achievements have been added. If you're anything like me and you like to consider yourself an overachiever, even though it takes you a dang long time to do it, then you may have already completed the achievements in Dune Spice Wars. Well, no longer. There are new ones for you to achieve. Of course, that makes sense, considering there's a new house and a new victory condition. So I wouldn't be holding myself hopes too highly that there'll be 100 million of them, but there should at least be some new ones around that. Big changes that may require more testing are also included in this list. Voices are now enabled at the 2x game speed. No, that's not it. But overall AI improvements, and the AI now defends against rebellions. And they've added most new game mechanics to the AI behaviors as well. So in single player, we should see them scale up. And multiplayer players can also rejoice reconnecting during game sessions is now more consistent. And you can save the game if you're not the host. Nice changes as my army gets swallowed by a worm. Not all fights will go your way. Thank you very much for watching. If you enjoyed this, I would really appreciate the support. These videos take a lot of work, and I usually pump them out pretty fast. I'll see you next time.